Welcome to the Future Is Borderless podcast with David Nilssen. We feature top entrepreneurs and thought leaders from around the world, those who bring a global mindset and a unique perspective to their life and business. Now, let's get started with the show.
David Nilssen here. I am the host of this podcast. On The Future is Borderless, we connect with business leaders from around the world who embody what I like to refer to as a borderless mindset. The purpose is to share ideas, new innovations, best practices, things that will help power growth in our personal and professional lives so that we can thrive in a rapidly changing world. Now, this episode is brought to you by Doxa Talent. Doxa helps businesses to source full-time, highly skilled workers from all over the world, enabling companies to scale faster, increase margin, and improve culture. If you want to learn how to grow your business with offshore talent, simply visit doxatalent.com. Now, today's show will be incredibly insightful. I recently sat down with Marc Gutman, the founder of Wild Story, which is a branding agency that specializes in helping businesses tell their unique stories. With a rich background in marketing and a passion for storytelling, Marc has worked with a diverse range of clients, from startups to established brands, guiding them in crafting narratives that really resonate with their audience. His expertise lies in understanding the emotional connections that drive consumer behavior and how businesses can leverage these insights to create impactful brands. Marc is also a sought-after speaker and the host of the popular podcast, the Wild Story Podcast, where he explores the intersection of storytelling and business. Listen here. All right. Well, Marc, welcome to the show.
David, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you here too. I think this is gonna be a really fun conversation. And I thought maybe as a starting point, it'd be great because I think there's probably many of our listeners who are not going to be familiar with Wild Story, and I'd love to hear a little bit about just your backstory and sort of what led you to starting the business and what it is that you do today.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it brief. I mean, it's a bit interesting. I was a kid that grew up in Metro Detroit, and it was a great time to grow up there. I always like to say nothing really happened. That's what made it great. It was just kind of a normal Midwest upbringing, kind of like a John Hughes movie a little bit. And I think I was just of that generation where my parents, my dad, it was first of his generation to go to college. He was a lawyer. He worked really hard. He was a lawyer his whole life. And I kind of always got the feeling that he just didn't really love his job, and he was doing it out of duty and he was doing it out of, economic mobility and all that. And so very grateful and very happy and that he did that. But it really left this big impression on me. Also, like at that time, being in an auto industry town, my friends would come and go, and it was usually due to their parents' job, right? There was lack of agency and control. It's like if your dad was an engineer and he had to go from Detroit to Seattle, that was happening. There was no real decision in that. It was very matter of fact. And so I think from a very early age, I struggled with this idea of our place in work, and should it bring us, joy, or is it more of this obligation, this thing that we grind through? Is it more of this like blue collar mindset? And that's really impacted me a lot. And the other thing about my dad is he and we just really connected on movies. And so I think this was the advent of VHS. And I remember once, my dad's big, it was kind of like a almost like Christmas family vacation. His Christmas bonus that year was this giant VCR. It came like in a cabinet, and the remote had like a cable, like a wire to it. And
Yeah.
and I remember like buying movies was something like, it was crazy. It was like probably like, $100 to buy a movie, which in today's dollars was probably like $500 or something. And but then video stores came, right? And we just loved movies. And so I was really, it just made a big impression on me. And then so from an early age, I mean, I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to take a run at working in the movie business. And so um I think one of the greatest, well, I'm sure we'll talk about entrepreneurship, but I think one of the greatest things about young entrepreneurs is just that they're naive and they're dumb and they're confident and arrogant and they believe in themselves. And those are, those words sometimes have negative connotation, but I'm saying that all like with real positive meaning with those descriptors. And
Yeah.
so I packed up my car at a crappy, I'm not like I'm not a Nepo baby as people are talking about on TikTok and all that. I didn't have any connections in the business. And I packed up an old kind of candy apple red crappy Oldsmobile and drove out to LA and started knocking on doors. And my very first job, and this is something I tell a lot of young entrepreneurs, a lot of young people who are asking me, for career advice. it's always been my philosophy, like get in the middle of the action and get a job. It doesn't matter what that job is, because you're going to learn in the first 3 months, you're going to learn what you like, what you don't like. Everything you thought about that industry is going to be proven true or false very quickly, and you're going to learn a lot. And so that was me in the movie industry. And my first job, I was driving film around for an Epcot, like 3 panel, 70 millimeter movie. First day on the job, I walk into this really weird building in Van Nuys, and I sit down on the floor, and I'm sitting next to Ellen DeGeneres, and she was the talent for that movie, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like right, everything like you think about Hollywood is kind of happening and coming true. But I was able, because I was moving these large canisters of film around. I had a all access for my crappy Oldsmobile with Michigan plate still in California. I had an all access pass to the Disney lot, and I would get the film, and I'd park literally next to the stars and their Porsches and everything. And I would drop the film off, and I had a lot of time to kill in between like the next pickup, and I would just go pop my head in and try to meet people, which now I just think is so crazy, right? Like to think that I was like walking the halls and being like, "Hey, I'm Mark. Like, what do you do?" Kind of thing. Like, I feel like now you'd be like, ushered out as a security risk or whatever. But it worked, and just like like a movie, a young producer who was in theme parks, not a very glamorous position, but had a cool office, and I could tell he was doing something and making a living. Slid a note across the desk after many months of us just chatting, and said, you should probably call this guy, or go see this guy. And so I went, and I looked this guy up. He says, "Come in. We're hiring." And it happened to be Oliver Stone and his production company and his producing partner. And so
Wow.
at the time, that company was called Illusion. I went and got that job, and kind of the rest is history in a way. I was able to work with him for several years. I did a lot of, my official title was story editor, and I read a billion scripts and learned all about story the hard way. It's not like we had like a framework on the wall or talked about it in real academic terms. It was kind of like you just had to learn by doing. And but I also did a lot of assistant work. I would bring Oliver, shots of Patron in the middle of writers' meetings. I would go drop scripts off. I would pick up dry cleaning for his producing partner, Dan Halstead, and things like that. And so I was able to spin that relationship into writing a few screenplays for hire for them, and then I got a writer's assistant job working for a comedy writer by the name of Mark Hyman, and they were doing a movie. He and his friend Zach Penn, and Zach has gone on to be super famous. He's written like most of the X-Men movies, Ready Player One. I mean, he's probably one of the most well-known feature guys out there at this stage. They were working on a movie called Osmosis Jones, and so I got to work on that movie, which was really fun. Which is even more fun because it's going to date me, but it's having a revitalization. Like my kids watch it in school now because it's a movie where Chris Rock. It's animated. It's animation and live action, and so in the live action, it's Bill Murray and his body. And when you go inside the body, it turns to animation, and that's Chris Rock and David Hyde Pierce, who, so it's like Chris Rock's like, the whole joke is he's a white blood cell, he's an immunity cop, and he's in there trying to fight the disease in the body. And so it's this very like body oriented thing. And so moving along, I'll kind of move quickly. I just knew that at a young age, I was like, there's a lot of the world I haven't seen. I didn't necessarily want to be. I think one of the things I learned by being in the middle of the action is show business is business. I thought I would go there and be real smart and make $1 billion and walk around, and then move to like Montana and like just phone in my ideas and continue to make a living. That's not true. You got to work really, really hard, and you got to show up every day. And it taught me that the process of creative is you got to work every day and work really hard. And I knew that if I wanted that career, I probably would not be leaving Los Angeles. So I came out to Colorado to take a break, and there was something really cool happening here, which was this whole tech scene was happening. And I was like, whoa, these people are cool, right? Like I was like, movie stars are one thing, but like entrepreneurs and people starting businesses and all this stuff. And I was wrapping up my time in Los Angeles. I was writing cartoons for Warner Brothers, spinoff of Osmosis Jones. And I fell into this company called Rain Dance, and they were doing audio and web conferencing. And I mean, it's exactly the technology we're on now, like on Zoom, or, you know, audio conferencing on your phone. But at the time, it was pretty disruptive tech, and it was very lucrative. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. So I'd write in the morning, and then I'd go to work for them, answering phone calls. Again, just getting a job, kind of figuring out Colorado, figuring out Boulder. And then really quickly, I was like, well, I don't want to answer phone calls for the rest of my life, and bells and tech support calls. Um, but so they had this wholesale division, and I got caught up in that with them, and thought that was really interesting. And from there, I saw the opportunity, and that's when I spun out, and started my first company, which was called Lighthouse Conferencing, and it was a audio and web conferencing arbitrage play. I like to tell people I was committing to large amounts of technology services, and chopping them up into smaller pieces. So sort of like going to Costco and buying the big tuna and the big relish and the big mayo and turning it into tuna fish salad, right? And kind of,
Yeah.
packaging these services for small business. Um, and as I went through that was a great success. It was awesome. And I learned a lot in that one, right? Because I complained about it a lot. You and I are both in EO. I'd be in forum. I'd talk about how, I mean, I'd be like, looking back now, I want to like slap young Mark, because I'd basically be like, man, this business makes a ton of money, but it's boring and it's repeatable and it just sort of works and it's not very exciting. And I was kind of like looking for something that had more soul and heart. And in hindsight, I also now believe that like really good businesses get kind of boring, because they get process, and they have a predictable outcome, and those are good things. At the time
Totally.
when I was young, and just I wanted to break it, and I didn't know better. But anyways, and I ended up selling that business for what I'd call double. Like I wasn't able to retire or anything, but it was a nice exit, and it was really cool. And I went into what I thought was my passion, was getting back to writing, back to being creative, doing brand strategy and narrative and storytelling, which I really do love. But I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, I think it's just an awful business model, right? Like it's like
But
it's
you're
very
doing it
hard,
anyways.
it's very challenging, and as a service business, it's very difficult. And I'll pause there, but that's kind of the backstory, and that's where I'm at now. And yeah, we can talk about anything you want about that.
Well, I am, by the way, I love how you said a young, dumb, stupid when you were describing the entrepreneur. I've often said there was a business I started in 2003, still exists today, still doing very, very well. I stepped away from it because of what you said. I got a little bit, I would say, it needed a new type of leader, someone who was more focused on standards and procedures and automation, not what I would call that initial entrepreneurial energy. And so I always tell people, though, that business, I was too young and dumb to know that I shouldn't have been able to do it. And if I was where I am today, I wouldn't have taken it on because it would have seemed too difficult at the time. And, so I love the way that you described that. Tell me a little bit about, so Wild Stories, the company you have today, what does it do and who is your core customer?
Yeah. So the core of Wild Story, um, I think if I'm putting it in layman's terms, it's really to differentiate yourself and help businesses to outmaneuver their competition. That's the benefit we're providing. How do we do that? Typically, we enter through brand strategy, a very strategic approach to businesses, and then we have an execution and an executable side with design and activation and campaign activation and stuff like that. And our core customer is, it started, my network, like our world around here is outdoor and lifestyle. So that's always been a core customer. We can talk a little bit about that. I've struggled with that sometimes as well, because another life lesson is cool customers are very difficult because everyone wants to have them as everyone wants to have them. Like they're very cool, but they don't have a lot of money, stuff like that. And so into the pandemic, and I think based on the technology experience, that I talked about with my previous company, started working with technology businesses as well. So that's like the third pillar, which is feels a little different, a little globbed on, but we love it. And it's amazing. And those customers we found, I think when we started working back with them during the pandemic, we're like, oh man, we're not gonna be working with the cool companies anymore. We're kind of selling our soul. And
Yeah.
actually, we love those companies, and they're so fun, and they're doing crazy things, solving big problems, and you know from a from a like an entrepreneurial lesson, like they really need our help, right? And so you can have the best business in the world, you can have the best product or service, but like if who you're selling to really doesn't need it, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter, right? And so they really need it, and so it's great.
Well, we're sitting here 2024, and 2 years ago, ChatGPT sort of became mainstream, right? Like that's when it hit the market, and everyone sort of realized, wow, this AI thing is real. It made it very, I think it made it real for a lot of people who knew things were happening and sort of the behind the scenes, but hadn't really seen the application or knew how to use it. How has that shifted your model? Because it does feel like now everyone is a content creator, everyone is sort of flooding the market with. Um, uh, it just feels noisy every time I get on LinkedIn. I just feel like, wow, it is so noisy. So tell me a little bit about like what are the sort of the key elements of the strategic work that you do that help people stand out in an environment like we're in today?
Yeah, so right, it is noisy, and it makes me think about, and we're going through this just like you, and it's been up and it's been down, and I remember that flashpoint when ChatGPT first came out. I was like, oh no, this is like the beginning of the end, and it's going to happen fast, and I'm going to be out of a job, and I mean, I was freaked out. I think I went through denial. You know, the way I see it now, and I don't know if this is going to be true, but it really makes me think of that scene in like war games when the computer sort of does like the net zero, like launches a billion different, so they there's a nuclear attack and then they attack, then they attack, and then it's just like total destruction, right? Because it's
Yeah.
just one thing, one action begets another reaction kind of thing. And that's the way this current climate feels, that everyone's just kind of throwing out like a ton of content, and then and then someone else puts out more content over the other person's content. And what's really going to be interesting is what are we going to what are we going to be interested in? Will AI be able to touch on that human specialness, that thing that we're so fickle about, that we're always looking for, that we don't know, right? That's disruptive and that catches our attention. I just don't know. And so our strategic process, right? We're really looking at, we try to keep it as simple as possible, although they can get very, very complicated. And, people just need to know, who are you? What do you do? And why do you matter to them? I mean, it's that simple.
Hmm.
And the problem is, like, our brains can't handle real complex things. They can't handle complex ideas. They can't handle complex numbers. Um, in some ways, the strategy is an art of putting people in a box while still helping them stand out and remain a little bit different, right? Because your customer needs to understand what you can do for them. Typically, they're thinking in very basic terms, right? Like I always play a game with role play with my customers when they're like, "Well, I do this," and then they're like so in love with their features and they're talking about this and then the science and the backing. And I always do this role play that, like, okay, my sister has the exact same problem that you solve. And I was on the phone with her last night, right? And what was she saying to me? And typically the client will be like, well, they say that you need, 200%, ROI on your investment, or your the science of it. And I'm like, no, no. Like, and we go through this back and forth. And typically it's like people talk in like very basic problems and very basic needs. And she'll say something like, I'm not doing well at work because our marketing's not working, or we're not selling to the government in the way that we should, and my job's at risk, or whatever, right? And so we get to that. And so helping people to start to whittle down all these very complex ideas into real simple language is one of the big parts of what we do. Also, there's a lot of like internal work and narrative work around culture, both internal and external. So we do a lot of that too. And like some of the favorite stuff I'm doing right now is around that type of work, is helping companies, especially when they're like going through some sort of change or some sort of inflection point, like reconnect with their business, remember who they are, and get people on board. And even that's been interesting. Like there's been times where like I've lost my religion a little bit on that, right? I'm like, does this stuff matter? Does it like are we really moving the needle in today's society? To your point, right? Everything is just so moving fast and transactional. And lately clients are like, look, like we need this work to move forward. We need to have strong mission, vision, values. We need to have a strong culture. So that's really been like fueling my fire and lifting me up and being like, okay, that this work does matter, and I do like it. Yeah.
Yeah. You said a couple of things that actually really resonate for me, and I want to sort of repeat them back to you in my own words and make sure that I've captured these accurately. So, one thing that you said was it's got to be in simple language, right? I think I've seen so many people who try to sound smarter or create more complexity than is probably needed. And the best example I can give is my own. I remember we worked with a firm years ago, and at the time, my previous company helped new entrepreneurs get capital to start or buy a business, and we do it through a variety of different ways. And our the way we would describe that was long and complex. And when we walked out of the workshop with this group, it was the money you need to start or buy a business. And that's where we left it. It was like we had gone from this complex, overly verbose, a lot of buzzwords to just a very simple statement that spoke to what the individual was likely looking for. Um,
Right,
and
because
so,
I can understand that, right? I'm not a financial professional, but
right,
what you just said, I get, and I get who you're for, I get what you do. Either if I'm a customer, I can help you, or more importantly, if I'm not a customer, instantly, I'm at lunch, right? And I'm talking to someone and they're like, yeah, I'm trying to get money to buy a business. I'm like, you know who you should talk to?
exactly.
You should talk to David.
Yeah, I have to say, like at first, it really bothered me because I guess I talk in that sort of jargony speech naturally, and so it's really hard sometimes to crystallize that message. But you said something else that I think is really important, and I've heard this a few different times, but I'd love for you to expand upon this. You
Mm.
said why it matters to them. Can you expand a little bit more on that point?
Yeah, so why it matters to the customer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, look, I mean, I'm as guilty as anybody. So like I live in this world. I'm aware of it, but I fall into the same traps as every business owner. I love my stuff, right? I'm in it all day. I think I'm super smart. I think I'm special, right? And I think that, the way I study brand and the effort I put into it is deserving of telling the world. Reality is my customers don't care about that, right? What they care about, and I always have to remember, is that they're looking to grow their business, right? They want to look cool, but not at the cost of growing their business. Like it's that simple. And so I think when we think about who we are, right? Gotta tell people who you are, what you do, the services you provide, but also like why we matter to them. And so in your example, be really important to be thinking about like why, what's important to that person who's looking for business or looking for money to buy a new business, right? And really honing in on that and putting them first and driving that first versus talking all about yourself and what you do and why you're awesome. And it's a real simple concept. Just most businesses don't do it.
Yeah, I recently came across a business, and actually their mission was stated on their website, and it was to make every client an ex champion, meaning ex the company. So it was all about them, right? It was about making the clients love them
Yeah.
versus doing something that really impacted the client, right? And I just thought it was sort of reverse. So just another example. Branding, brand stories. I I'll make a sort of general comment. I believe that a lot of companies know that they need to have brand or have a well-defined brand and a brand strategy, but it's not cheap to do it well. And oftentimes it's difficult to measure the success of that. So, how do you think about measuring the success of branding work versus like, hey, I can buy PPC ads and know instantly whether or not it's generating leads, right? So, how do you help clients sort of figure that out?
Oh man, such a good question. And you're right. I mean, it's expensive. It's time consuming. A lot of times it takes a lot of the best brains in an organization off task. It's a heavy lift. And
Yeah.
so I think the best thing, and like I can, just speak from experience. Well, a couple things. Brands, like it's also confusing sort of discipline and topic. Like it means different things to different people. To a lot of people, it's like the design and a logo and it's cool swag, which it is. To other people, it's the brand DNA, it's your mission, your vision, your values, which it is. To other people, it's how do you differentiate, in the marketplace and who's your core customer and things like that. And that's also part of what it is. And so it is big, it is complex, it butts up against business strategy, and it takes a lot of time. And There really is. I mean, look, there's no great perfect way of measuring ROI. We, as branding professionals, we cite all these brand reports and things like that. And the most valuable, there's all these companies out there that do the most valuable brands and
Yeah.
say that, hey, brand accounts to like 90% of value. And, we can talk a little bit about like this, well, what is a business? Is it the physical location? Is it the people? Is it, what is it? Like there's usually nothing very when you break it down, it's this weird thing. It's a story we all believe in. And so you can kind of track it back. Well, it's your brand, but there's no really great way to track it. And so, what we're typically looking for are businesses that it's easy to diagnose the problem, right? And so they're being misunderstood in the marketplace. Salespeople are coming back and saying, hey, look, like we're saying we're this, but everyone thinks we're this. That's a brand problem. That's easy for us to say that we can help you fix that, right? There's culture problems, right? Hey, we are not all rowing in the same direction, or we're changing leadership, or we want to go in a different direction. Company, I can't name the company I'm working with right now, but I mean, that's exactly what's happening. They have a perception. They're one of the originators in their industry. They were a pioneer, and now they're being seen as like sort of the stodgy corporate brand, and they've lost their identity. We need to get that back and remind people about who they are. And so those types of problems, while we can't, like an ad spend, give a one-to-one ROI metric and tie it back, it's very clear once we do the work and the direction changes. But to say like 100%, like, hey, the ROI is this, I'm going to be the first person to say that we can't tie that back. I mean, if you come see me speak in a keynote, I'll show you some case studies where the hockey stick goes like this. I'm like, yeah, that's after we did the brand. But to try to illustrate it, but the reality is like it's very hard to tie in, and so there has to be some belief, there
Yeah.
has to be some faith. It's kind of like, how do you know culture is going to drive the business? A positive culture is going to drive the business forward.
Yeah. It's hard to do. I mean, I think, but I think to your, and maybe sort of my own words, but I think you know a good brand when you see it, because the brand isn't just the words on the wall, it's the experience that you have with them, right? And I think the right brands attract the customers that believe what the company believes. Um, but it is, to your point, it's hard to sort of put a precise ROI on it. You said something about case studies. I'm actually curious, is there a particular brand that maybe not even that you've worked on, but that you just admire, that how they've built it and how they've brought it to life?
Oh man, there's so many. Uh, I mean,
Maybe one that this audience would be able to visualize.
yeah, I mean, you can visualize this. You may or may not know it, but there's a brand out of, I did not work on it. I'm a big fan for what they've done. It's called Piece of Cake Moving, and I've seen it in New York City. It's a moving company, right? So a tough business. And what I really like about it from a case study is you think about the moving business, and if you brought a bunch of people in, what would be the complaints? Like it's always kind of like it's rough. It always feels kind of like, the movers are always kind of big and rough, and you don't know, they feel like unfriendly. The pricing's always weird. Like it's always
Yeah.
like you're getting like nickeled and dimed and all this stuff. So Piece of Cake Moving in New York City, I first noticed them because all their trucks are hot pink. And then the movers coming out, and they're nice, and they use like nice trucks or like Mercedes Sprinter vans. And the movers come out, and they're all wearing these very nice hot pink hoodies, right? And I'm like, wow, like how accessible, like how like that feels non-threatening. I love it.
Softer.
So I go and I start to dig in, and I don't really know the brand much, and I haven't used them, but on the website they talk about totally all-in pricing, right? Like simple pricing, like we're not going to, what you see is what you get, and all these things. And so to me, like that's a real, and I like using case studies that are real accessible, right? Real. Like everyone talks about Apple, and yeah, Apple is one of the greatest brands, and it's a great brand to aspire to, but most of us are not Apple, right? And most of us haven't been able to build that will. Um, Same with like a Patagonia. Patagonia is an amazing brand, but it is like a one-off. Like Yvon was crazy, and he made every poor business decision. It just worked out in his favor, right? Like he decided that he was gonna, do everything for the environment and go organic, and it just I mean, you can call it luck or whatever. I mean, it just worked out. Like and it took a lot of courage to do that, and he did it in spite. Like he didn't really care at the time if the business was successful or not, and it worked out. So I like looking at brands like that are successful, and that's one that like I feel like they looked at the problem, they looked at the industry, and they said like, how can we change this and make this a better experience for the customer? Right? It
Mhm.
wasn't about someone that had a bunch of moving trucks probably and was like, well, how do I sell more moving? Right? Like, how do we fix this problem because moving sucks?
Yeah. Yep. Solving problems for the industry. And you're right, actually, just as you described it, I think we moved from Seattle to Boise, Idaho about 2.5 years ago. And that experience that you described is exactly what we dealt with. And in fact, there were times where, you know, yeah, it just was not a great experience at all. And so I can appreciate why that they've seen some momentum and why people would want that.
Yeah.
Tell me, I'm curious, for someone who is just getting a business started, or maybe they've already started it, but they realize they really need to refresh their brand story in general, um, or their brand, I should say. Talk to me about like the two or three most critical components that you think somebody needs to address within a brand in order to sort of begin to bring it to life.
Yeah, and I do think it changes over the life cycle of a business and the size of a business. And I get a lot of like early stage entrepreneurs that come to us and say, "Hey, we need our brand store." I'm like, "No, you don't. You know what you need to figure out? You need to figure out like, do you have a business? Are you solving a problem? Do you have something
Your
someone will
product market
buy?
fit.
Yeah, do you have product market fit? Like, I'm too expensive. Like, don't come to me. Don't waste your money on me. Go to Midjourney, build a logo, throw it on a piece of letterhead and go sell something. And then if that all works, we can talk, right? And then you can start to expand and then you can start to refine that brand story. And so, I think in any great story, there's just there's transformation, right? There's what is to what could be. So in any like if you're talking about where to start, think about that. How are you going to tell that story? How are people living their lives? What's going on? And when you come in, like how is their life better, and how are they gonna be the hero of their own story, because that's all they really care about, right? All we care about mostly as individuals is our daily lives, the problems in front of us, how we're going to help our family, how we're going to get through our day, things like that. So that would be the place to start, and to communicate that, right? And it's not that hard. I think what happens is, especially as entrepreneurs, we have so many ideas. We see so much opportunity. We start tacking at every opportunity, right? We're like, "Well, no, maybe it needs to be funny. Maybe it needs to be this segment. Maybe it needs to be that." And there is a part of that, and when you're very early stage, that's appropriate. But at a certain point, then you got to say, look, we're going after a certain kind of customer, like you articulate. Hey, we're going after people that need money to buy businesses. That's very specific,
Yeah.
right? And that's great. And back to what we were talking about, get a little boring. Say
Yeah.
that over and over again. Back to Patagonia, I like to imagine that their head of marketing and brand is like just like, can we talk about something other than like water rights or save the planet? They're like, no. We've got like five key things we hit, right? It's like public lands, water rights, like recycle, and whatever the other two are. And we're just gonna find new ways to talk about that over and over and over again. And I think if anything, if I could leave like your audience with any two big ideas, it's like stay consistent, right? Stop changing. On my wall right here, I've got a quote from Wally Byam, who's the founder of Airstream, and it says, "Let's not make changes, only improvements." So once you get into a zone, once you know who you are serving, don't be tacking all over the place. Stay consistent,
Yeah.
right? And help those people to know what you do and that you're there for them.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's actually a really wise quote, and we'll just double click on that for a second. I think there's always this desire to evolve with the market, and I know that it's important to make those improvements. But so many times you'll see somebody who's come out with something interesting, and you'll want to immediately shift to sort of mirror that. And it's really important to stay consistent with who you are. And I've heard you speak before about the importance of authenticity in a brand. Can you just share a little bit about what that means to you?
Yeah, and to me, and I think it's going to mean different things to different people. But I do believe that authenticity is just all about being really genuine and really caring about that end customer. Now, a lot of times in my brands that I work with, when I'm talking about outdoor and lifestyle, I mean, they're coming out of that space, right? Like they're, if I'm working with like climbing industry, they're climbers. And it's a really good example because there's some, businesses, they start off with this like essence of being something. Let's say climbing as an example. And as they grow and as they become a business, they have to change and they have to morph a little bit. And that's where it becomes really challenging. Like, how do you maintain that sort of that authenticity of being a dirtbag climber, if you will, as you grow and become a multi-million dollar company?
Mhm.
Right. And, I think Black Diamond does it really well, just staying in that space. I think Patagonia does it really well, but those are always the challenges. And it's really easy to start to lose sight of that. You look, really big company here is VF, right? And VF has bought things like North Face and I think they own Vans and they own Smartwool and all these companies or all these outdoor brands. And you can tell, and I'll be a little critical of them, you can tell, right, that they've lost their authenticity. They're trying to, make numbers. They're making cost cuts. They're doing things. They're making decisions to get more profitable soft goods on shelves at Dick's Sporting Goods versus then getting really cool technology out at maybe a smaller retailer or something like that. And they're making those decisions and they're losing who they are. So I think just staying, authenticity today for me is just staying really close to the customer, really remembering that's why you're in business and continually looking to make that customer happy. That doesn't mean customer's always right, right? Like I
Right.
want to be clear about that. But being very clear about why you're here. And I think sometimes, and especially as entrepreneurs too, like we don't always want to solve a problem. We just want to start a business. And I've been guilty of that. And those have been the times when things have not gone well.
Awesome. We're getting close to the end of our time here, but I'm just curious, what are you currently trying to learn about or exploring in your field that really excites you?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it. I think AI is it's crazy. It hurts my head to think about. It excites me. It scares me. I understand it on a very base tactical level. Look, we're using ChatGPT as an editing tool and things like that. I mean, there's no question about that. But like, where's this going to go? Are we going to be ruled by the robots, or is there going to be this opportunity for still the human experience, the human voice to rise above that and stand out and be different? Like right now, ChatGPT is pretty much, it's pulling from the internet and it's the average, it's taking all these ideas that are already out there and putting them together. I think we're going to get to a point where it's going to be able to build on the average and become original. But, so that's what I'm most interested as it relates to this. And then I also think about just as an entrepreneur, like all those businesses that um, are more enhanced by AI rather than replaced by AI. So I think, creative marketing, social media, all that stuff is like, we were talking about it earlier. There's just so much noise, there's so much energy, there's so much activity. I don't see that slowing down. Um, and then I start to think, well, will more traditional, older ways of customer outreach become viable again, right? Will it be more interesting to get a phone call? Will it be interesting to get a letter? I don't know, but those are the things I'm thinking about, right?
That's awesome. I actually just said the other day to my wife, I love when I get mail because I'm tired of email and text messages. Just having something, tactile to hold and read feels special now, which is so interesting. But
Well, right. And like an email has no place in my brain, right? I've literally, if you asked me to tell you what were the last 10 emails I answered right before we got on this interview, I probably could not recall them,
yeah.
right? It's like radio, it's just going in and like past me, I'm responding. But you're right, something tactile, something cool catches my attention. And I think at the end of the day, when we talk about branding, advertising, marketing, those types of things, that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to capture attention. It's a bit of an interruption. Hey, like, look at me, right? Why should you care, right? And that's the goal. and it's always changing, and that's what keeps it interesting, at least for me. It's like we're changing it. I like to think of like brand on one sphere and sort of the world around it, and it's constantly moving, and we're always looking for those two dials to align and be like dee, 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 dee. And right when we think we've got it, the world evolves again, right? We have an election, or we have like we have just things in the ethos that are changing all around us, and conversation, and the way we perceive the world, and we're just always trying to find that alignment, and that's what's kind of cool.
Awesome. Well, I think we'll leave it there. We've been listening to Marc Gutman, the founder of Wild Story. Marc, where can people go to learn more about the work that you do?
Yeah, so we're really easy to find. We're at wildstory.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I do have a professional Instagram account at Marc Gutman, at Instagram at Marc Gutman, but I'm also, if you want to follow me running long distances or sliding on snow, I'm also at Guttyville on Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll get those in the show notes. And thanks again for being on the show today.
Cool. Thanks, David. It's great to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilssen. Be sure to click subscribe to future episodes so you can hear from more top entrepreneurs and thought leaders. And we'll see you again next time.